Little MAGA girl kicked out of KFC by Leftist, but her wee veteran grandfather rushed in and shouted something that stopped everyone cold. Subscribe to the channel right now to find out the end of this epic story and comment below which part of this great America you are watching from. The Sunday afternoon sun seemed to shine with a different, almost nostalgic quality over the hot asphalt of the parking lot. For most people, it was just another ordinary day, a pause in the frantic routine of modern life, a moment to seek comfort in a quick meal with family. But for Millie, a girl of just 14, with bright eyes that reflected a purity increasingly rare in today's world, that Sunday carried a special significance. She walked with light but determined steps, feeling the synthetic fabric of her improvised cape. A large, vibrant flag of the United States rippled gently against her back with every warm breeze. On her chest, stamped across the red cotton of her t-shirt, the acronym MAGA wasn't a political war cry or a provocation to her. It was a heritage. It was the living memory of the values her grandfather had taught her, the stories of freedom she heard before bed, and the simple, honest belief that loving one's nation was the greatest virtue a citizen could possess. Millie felt hungry, that ravenous, uncomplicated hunger typical of adolescence. The glowing KFC sign ahead, featuring the familiar face of Colonel Sanders, promised the comfort of fried chicken and the sweetness of an ice-cold soda. She adjusted the pink bow in her blonde hair, took a deep breath, and smiled to herself. In her innocent mind, the world outside was still the safe place her parents and grandfather described, a place where freedom of speech was sacred, and where a child wouldn't be judged by the color of her shirt or the symbol she carried on her shoulders. She didn't know, however, that the border between the safety of her home and the hostility of the outside world was about to be crossed as she stepped through the automatic glass doors of that establishment. Upon entering the restaurant, the thermal shock of the freezing air conditioning was the first thing to hit her, but it was immediately followed by something much colder and sharper, the shift in the human atmosphere. The place was moderately full, with families, groups of teenagers and workers on their breaks. The ambient noise of conversations and laughter, which filled the space seconds before, underwent a subtle but perceptible alteration. Heads turned, eyes that were previously focused on cell phones or menus now fixed on her. They weren't looks of friendly curiosity. They were gazes loaded with ideological weight, looks that judged, sentenced, and condemned in a matter of milliseconds. Millie felt a chill run down her spine, but straightened her posture. "Be brave and kind," her mother always said. She gripped the corners of the American flag as if it were a security blanket and walked toward the line. She could hear the whispers. They were low, like the hissing of snakes, but the words were unmistakable to someone who was already beginning to perceive the cruel division of her country. "Look at that," whispered a woman at a nearby table, crinkling her nose as if she smelled something foul. "How do the parents allow it? It's indoctrination," murmured a young man with thick glasses, typing furiously on his smartphone, likely already drafting a post to destroy this stranger's image on social media. The young patriot tried to ignore it. She just wanted lunch. She tried to focus on the illuminated menu above the counter, deciding between a chicken strip combo or a classic sandwich. But the feeling of being an intruder in her own country began to tighten her chest. She felt like a small boat, adrift in an ocean of silent resentment. The loneliness of that moment was palpable. There, surrounded by dozens of people, Millie was completely alone. Cancel culture and the hatred for traditional values had created an invisible wall around her, isolating her, transforming a sweet girl into a target. The line moved, and Millie finally reached the counter. It was then that she saw the true danger. It wasn't the whispers of the cowardly customers, but the hostile authority awaiting her on the other side of the register. Brenda, the employee assigned to that register, was the living embodiment of everything that opposed the values Millie carried in her heart. With hair shaved on the sides and the top dyed an aggressive neon green that seemed to glow with its own light of indignation, Brenda wasn't there just to serve food. Her arms were covered in tattoos featuring anarchist symbols and radical political slogans. On her lanyard beside her name tag were several buttons with catchphrases about class struggle and dismantling the system. When Brenda looked up and saw Millie, time seemed to freeze. There was no standard corporate greeting, no trained smile, or the question, "May I take your order?" There was only a dense, suffocating silence. The employee's eyes, outlined by heavy dark makeup, narrowed into slits of absolute contempt. She looked at the pink bow in Millie's hair, lowered her gaze to the red T-shirt with the white MAGA letters, and stopped, fixing her stare with furious intensity on the United States flag draped over the girl's shoulders. To Brenda, this wasn't a 14-year-old customer. This girl was, in her vision distorted by radical ideology, the representation of the enemy. Here stood everything she had been taught to hate in her digital bubbles and activist meetings: patriotism, tradition, innocence, the nuclear family, old America. Millie's mere presence in that space, which Brenda considered her territory, was interpreted as a personal affront, a violation of her safe space. Millie, feeling the hostility radiate from the woman like heat from a furnace, swallowed hard. Her hands began to tremble slightly, clutching the small wallet where she kept the allowance money she had earned helping her father in the garden. She tried to smile, a shaky and conciliatory smile, looking for any trace of humanity in the person before her. "Hi," Millie stammered, her voice coming out quieter than she intended. "I'd like a number 3, please. With a Coke." Brenda didn't move to register the order. Her fingers didn't touch the computer screen. She remained static, arms crossed over her chest, breathing heavily, like a bull about to charge. The contempt on her face twisted into a sneer of disgust. "You think this is funny?" Brenda's voice came out hoarse, not quite a shout yet, but a low growl that made the nearest customers stop eating. Millie blinked, confused and frightened. "Excuse me, what?" "That outfit. That rag on your back." Brenda pointed a finger with a black-painted nail, an accusatory claw, toward the American flag. "You think you can walk in here on my shift, rubbing that symbol of hate in my face?" Millie's heart raced. Fear, cold and sharp, began to take hold of her. She had never been confronted like this. At home, the flag was sacred. At school, although some teachers turned up their noses, no one had ever attacked her so directly. She was vulnerable, exposed, a child facing the irrational fury of an indoctrinated adult. It's just my country's flag," Millie whispered, her eyes beginning to water. The injustice of that accusation hurt more than any insult. "I just want lunch. Your country." Brenda let out a dry, humorless laugh, loud enough to draw the attention of the entire restaurant now. "This country is a lie, and you, girl, are a walking billboard for fascism. We don't serve your kind here." The atmosphere in the KFC became electric. The tension was unbearable. Millie looked around, seeking help, looking for someone to say, "Hey, stop that, she's just a child." But what she saw was desolate. Some customers looked away, pretending not to see the moral aggression happening a few feet away. Others, the younger and more radicalized ones, grabbed their cell phones not to help, but to film, hoping to make the moment the little fascist was put in her place go viral. She was alone in the wolves' den. Millie felt the weight of isolation, the vulnerability of her age, combined with the purity of her intentions, contrasted violently with the cynical malice of the employee. She didn't understand the complexity of political hatred. She only felt the pain of rejection and the terror of being cornered. The little MAGA girl, was about to discover that in a world dominated by the selective tolerance of the radical left, her existence was considered an offense. And Brenda, empowered by the complicit silence of the crowd, was just getting started. Brenda's initial refusal to serve the meal wasn't the end, but merely the spark that would detonate a carefully orchestrated explosion of public humiliation. The restaurant, once a place of anonymous transit, transformed into a modern Roman arena, where the audience, thirsty for scandal, awaited the sacrifice. Millie stood frozen before the counter, her fingers gripping the cold edge of the Formica countertop until her knuckles turned white. The initial shock of being called a fascist by a stranger paralyzed her ability to react logically. She was just a 14-year-old girl, raised to respect her elders and be polite in public, and her emotional repertoire didn't possess the tools to deal with the visceral ideological hatred emanating from that woman with green hair. I don't understand," Millie stammered, her voice trembling, trying to maintain her dignity while feeling the eyes of dozens of strangers burning into her back. "I have money. It's money I earned working. I'm just hungry." Brenda, smelling fear and interpreting Millie's politeness as weakness, stepped out from behind the cash register. She came around the counter with heavy steps, invading the girl's personal space. The leftist employee didn't see a frightened child. She saw an avatar of the patriarchy and oppressive capitalism that needed to be dismantled right there, live for her imaginary followers and the validation of her own social bubble. "Work? You call exploiting the system work?" Brenda scoffed, bringing her face close to Millie's, completely ignoring the social distancing norms she likely preached online herself. "Your money is dirty. It represents exclusion. You come here dressed in this propaganda of hate, with that hat, with that ridiculous cape that glorifies a country built on suffering, and you think you can simply buy fried chicken as if nothing is happening." At that moment, another employee, a pale young man who looked terrified by the scene, tried to intervene in the most passive way possible. Perhaps out of pity or just wanting to avoid a bigger scene that could cost him his job, he quickly slid a ready tray across the counter toward Millie. On the tray was the standard order, a small bucket of chicken, golden French fries, and a large cup of cola with ice, the lid still unstable. "Here, take it and go, please," the young man whispered, retreating quickly into the shadows of the kitchen, afraid of Brenda's wrath. Millie looked at the tray as if it were a lifeline. If she could grab the food and leave, it would all be over. She reached out with trembling hands, her fingers grazing the red plastic of the tray. "Thank you," she murmured to the young man, trying to ignore Brenda's imposing presence beside her. But Brenda wouldn't allow the little MAGA girl to leave with a victory, however small. To the activist's radicalized mind, allowing Millie to eat in peace would be normalizing fascism. Tolerance, in the radical left's distorted dictionary, only applied to those who strictly agreed with their dogmas. "Oh no, you are not taking that," Brenda shouted. The scream was shrill, loaded with performative hysteria. With a sharp, violent motion, driven by the fury of her social justice, Brenda intercepted the action. Before Millie could steady the tray in her hands, the activist's hand slapped the side of the plastic object. It wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate act of aggression. Time seemed to slow down for Millie. She saw the cup of soda tip over, the lid pop off, and the dark, icy liquid launch into the air like a liquid projectile. The French fries flew in all directions, a golden, greasy rain. The chicken hit the floor with a dull thud. Splash! The soda hit Millie square in the chest, soaking the MAGA t-shirt and running down onto her pink tulle dress and the American flag on her shoulders. The ice pelted her skin, but the physical cold was nothing compared to the chill in her soul she felt at that instant. The tray clattered noisily onto the tile floor, echoing through the silent restaurant. Millie stood paralyzed, arms outstretched in the air, holding nothing, while the sticky liquid dripped down her legs and stained her white socks. She looked down, seeing her ruined outfit, the food wasted on the dirty floor, mixing with dust and shoe prints. "Oops," said Brenda with cruel sarcasm, crossing her arms and smiling with malicious satisfaction. "Looks like gravity is against fascists too. That's what happens when you try to invade spaces that aren't yours. This is redistribution of justice." The restaurant was in a deadly silence, broken only by the sound of a few stifled giggles coming from a group of teenagers in the back, filming everything on their phones. "Going on TikTok!" someone yelled. The humiliation was total. Millie felt hot tears well up, impossible to hold back. The crying came convulsively, a sound of pure, childish pain that should have melted the heart of any decent adult, but which only fed Brenda's inflated ego. "Don't cry, you spoiled brat," the leftist continued, raising her voice to perform for the audience. "Those tears are tears of white privilege. You're crying because you dirtied your dress. People are dying because of the ideology you carry on that hat. You are not the victim here. I am the victim. We are the victims of your toxic existence." Millie stepped back, slipping slightly in the puddle of soda. She brought her hands to her face, trying to hide, trying to disappear. The American flag, now stained with soda, weighed heavy on her back. She felt dirty, not just from the food, but from the toxic words being vomited onto her. "Why are you doing this?" Millie sobbed, her voice cracking. "I love my country. I didn't do anything to you." "Loving this country is an act of violence," Brenda retorted, now totally out of control, gesturing frantically. "You are indoctrinated, a little sheep of the patriarchal system. Get out! Get out of my store now before I call security and say you assaulted me." The lie was audacious, typical of the manipulation tactics Brenda had learned in her online forums. Invert the blame, accuse the victim, dominate the narrative. Millie looked around, desperate, seeking a look of compassion. She saw a man in a suit, averting his gaze to his plate. She saw a mother covering her son's eyes. She saw the cell phones pointed at her like digital weapons. No one moved. The fear of being labeled, of being cancelled, of being the next target of that woman's fury paralyzed everyone. Political correctness had created a society of cowards, and Millie was the sacrifice on the altar of this new order. She was cornered between the puddle of filth on the floor and the wall of hate in front of her. The feeling of abandonment was overwhelming. Everything her grandfather said about courage and honor seemed distant in that cold, artificial place. She was about to give in, to run from there and never wear her favorite shirt again, to hide her flag in the back of the closet and accept that the world belonged to the screamers and the intolerant. Hope was fading, draining away along with the soda down the floor drain. Brenda, sensing triumph, took another step forward, ready for the verbal coup de grace, ready to shove the girl out if necessary. The little MAGA girl closed her eyes, waiting for the impact, waiting for the end of her dignity, shaking uncontrollably as the smell of sugar and grease sickened her. Despair had reached its absolute peak. There seemed to be no way out, no justice, no salvation on that dark Sunday. The humiliation seemed bottomless. The KFC restaurant, now a theatre of cruelty, watched in silence as Brenda, drunk on the momentary power that others' passivity granted her, decided to take the final step. It wasn't enough to have spilled the soda. It wasn't enough to have insulted a child's honor and turned her lunch into garbage on the floor. The ideology driving the activist demanded total submission, a symbolic renunciation. Brenda looked at the American flag, now stained with dark syrup and clinging to Millie's trembling shoulders, and her eyes shone with a dangerous fanaticism. To her, that piece of cloth didn't represent the freedom that allowed her to protest. It represented the enemy to be annihilated. "You're not leaving here wearing that," Brenda hissed, her voice dropping to a threatening tone as she took another step forward, invading the last barrier of personal space remaining to the girl. "That symbol offends me. It offends all of us. If you don't have the decency to take it off, I'll take it off you, for the good of the community." Millie's eyes went wide, terror paralyzing her lungs. She gripped the corners of the flag tightly, knuckles white, crossing her arms over her chest in an instinctive gesture of protection. "No!" Millie sobbed, backing away until her back hit the cold wall near the condiment station. "It's mine! You can't touch it!" "Oh, I can and I will. This is an anti-fascist intervention," Brenda screamed, reaching out with her black-painted fingernails toward the girl's neck, ready to rip the patriotic cape off by force. The movement was aggressive, predatory. The customers held their breath. Cell phones were raised higher, eager for viral violence. Injustice was about to become physical. The world seemed to have turned upside down, where the aggressor was celebrated as a social justice hero and the victim was demonized. It was in that millisecond, when Brenda's fingers were inches from the sacred fabric of the flag, that the universe responded. Not with thunder from the sky, but with a rhythmic metallic sound coming from the entrance, a sound that cut through the tension like a guillotine. Clack, tock, clack, tock. The glass door of the restaurant swung open violently, hitting the stopper, but no one looked at the door itself. Everyone looked at the figure filling the doorway, blocking the afternoon sunlight and casting a long, imposing shadow over the dining room. It wasn't just a man, it was a living monument. There, standing with a posture that defied the curvature of his 90-something years, was Sergeant Major Thomas Miller, Millie's grandfather. He wasn't wearing civilian clothes. He was dressed for battle, or rather, for eternal honor. His World War II dress uniform, the pinks and greens, preserved immaculately for decades, was deep olive drab, without a single crease out of place. The combat boots, though ancient, shone with a mirror polish that reflected the fluorescent fast food lights. But what stole the air from the room wasn't the fabric, it was the decorations. On the old soldier's left breast, a galaxy of metal and ribbon told the story of the 20th century. The silver star shone with a cold light, the Purple Heart pulsed with the memory of spilled blood. The European and Pacific campaign medals tinkled softly as he took his first step inside. On his head, his overseas cap was positioned with millimeter precision. He leaned on a dark wooden cane, not as a sign of weakness, but as a scepter of authority. "Step away from her!" Sergeant Major Miller's voice wasn't Brenda's hysterical scream, it was a command. A deep, gravelly roar, forged in the artillery fire of Normandy beaches and tempered in the ice of the Ardennes. It was a voice that didn't ask for permission, it demanded immediate obedience. The sound was so authoritative that Brenda froze mid-motion, her hand still outstretched in the air, hovering over Millie's flag. She turned her head slowly, eyes wide with shock, meeting the veteran's steely gaze. Sergeant Miller's face was a map of deep wrinkles, each telling a story of sacrifice, but his blue eyes were clear, piercing, and burned with a righteous fury that would make entire armies retreat. The silence that fell over the KFC was absolute. The sound of the soda machines seemed deafening. No one chewed, no one spoke. Sergeant Miller advanced. He didn't run, he marched. Clack, boot, tock, cane. Every step was a sentence. He crossed the restaurant like an icebreaker ship, and the crowd of cowardly spectators instinctively parted, opening a path of respect and fear before that aura of ancestral power. He reached the conflict zone and, without hesitation, placed himself physically between Brenda and Millie. He used his own frail body, armored by history, as a human shield. He turned his back to the aggressor for a second, only to look into Millie's eyes. The girl, trembling and dirty, looked up and saw, Not a stranger, but her grandfather, her savior, an angel in uniform. He winked at her, a tiny gesture of familiar comfort, before pivoting on his heels to face the leftist. "Did you hear what I said?" Miller spoke, now quieter but with lethal intensity, pointing the tip of his cane at Brenda's chest, keeping her at a distance. "Retract your claws. You are on American soil, not in a re-education camp." Brenda, recovering from the initial fright, tried to summon her usual arrogance. She straightened up, adjusted her glasses, and tried to look at the veteran with disdain, though her legs shook slightly. "And who are you?" she snapped, trying to raise her voice to regain control of the narrative. "Another old white man coming to tell a woman what to do. You have no authority here. This is private property, and that girl is violating our hate speech policies with that fascist outfit." The word fascist hung in the air. Sergeant Miller let out a short, dry, bitter laugh. He took a step forward, forcing Brenda to back up against the counter. "Fascist." Miller repeated the word as if it tasted like ash. "Young lady, I was 18 years old when I crossed the ocean on a transport ship, seasick and scared to fight real fascists. I saw my friends, boys who never had the chance to grow up, get shredded by MG-42 machine guns, so the world wouldn't be dominated by the tyranny you pretend to fight." He pointed to the medals on his chest. "This here isn't Halloween decoration. This is the price of your freedom, the price of your right to dye your hair green, to speak the nonsense you speak, and to work in a place where you aren't forced to salute a dictator. And you dare!" His voice trembled with contained rage. "You dare call my granddaughter a fascist for loving the flag that draped the coffins of my brothers?" She's provoking," stammered Brenda, feeling the moral high ground disappear beneath her feet. She looked at the customers, seeking support, but saw something different now. The cell phones had lowered. People were looking at the floor, ashamed. The veteran's presence had broken the spell of apathy. Historical truth was crushing the ideological narrative. "Provoking?" Miller slammed his cane on the floor hard, making the manager, who was still hiding, jump. "The only provocation here is your lack of character. You attack a defenseless girl because she thinks differently than you. That is the definition of cowardice. You people talk about tolerance, about love, but what I see in your eyes is pure hate, the same hate I saw in the eyes of the enemy in 1944. The uniform changes, the words change, but the tyranny is the same. You want to silence those who disagree. That's not being progressive, Missy. That is being a fast food tyrant." Brenda was cornered. Her circular logic of cancellation didn't work against someone who had faced real death. She tried one last card, the card of bureaucracy and institutional victimhood. "You are threatening me!" she screamed, her shrill voice cracking. "This is assault! I'm calling the police! I'm reporting both of you! You're going to be banned! I'm going to post this on the internet and ruin your lives!" "You don't know who you're messing with. Twitter will hear about this." The threat hung in the air, toxic, the modern weapon of cancellation. But Miller didn't even blink. He drew himself up to his full height, looking like a giant. "Call them!" he challenged with icy calm. "Call the police! Call the army! Call the president! I'll stand right here waiting. And when they arrive, I'll show them what you did to an American child. Let's see who America supports, an old soldier who bled for this soil, or a bully who throws food at children." Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked around and saw the contempt in the eyes of the customers, who seconds earlier were indifferent. She had lost the audience. Red with rage and humiliation, but unable to face the moral wall before her, she let out a frustrated scream, ripped off her apron, and threw it on the floor. "You people aren't worth my time. I don't get paid to deal with Nazis," she shouted, using the ultimate insult as she ran to the back of the restaurant, slamming the kitchen door hard, fleeing from the truth she couldn't bear. The tension in the room didn't dissipate immediately. The evil had retreated, but the institutional threat still hovered. The manager finally appeared, pale and sweating, looking at the mess on the floor and at the veteran. Miller stared at him with a severe look that said, "We'll deal with you later." The veteran then turned slowly to Millie. The combat posture vanished, replaced by a painful tenderness. He ignored the sticky soda on the floor, ignored the pain in his old knees, and bent down slightly to be at eye level with the girl. The little MAGA girl was still crying, but now they were tears of relief. She looked at him as if he were Captain America in the flesh. "It's all right now, soldier," Miller whispered, his gravelly voice choked with emotion. He pulled a white linen handkerchief, impeccably folded, from his uniform pocket. With infinite gentleness, he began to wipe the soda stains from Millie's cheek. She said I was bad," Millie sobbed, her voice small and broken. "Because of my hat. Because of the flag." Miller stopped. He placed his gloved hand on the girl's shoulder. On the fabric of the American flag, Brenda had tried to rip away. "Look at me," he asked. Millie raised her damp eyes. "Never ever let anyone tell you that you are bad for loving your country. What you have in your heart is precious. They are afraid of it. They are afraid of your innocence and your faith because it's something they've lost." He adjusted the flag on her shoulders with reverence, as if handling a holy relic. "This flag has been through worse things than soda and screaming, my dear. It endures, and so will you." Miller lifted his chin, looking around at the customers who were still watching, ashamed. "We don't back down. We don't apologize for being patriots. Understood?" Millie nodded, feeling a new strength bloom in her chest. A flame rekindled by the spark of that old hero. But Miller's gaze was still vigilant. He knew the battle in that restaurant was over, but the war outside continued. Brenda had fled to call for backup or to destroy their reputation online. The danger hadn't fully passed. It had just shifted battlefields. But there, in that moment, under the protection of her grandfather, the little MAGA girl was safe. The kitchen door, through which the activist Brenda had fled like a cowardly shadow before the light of truth, still swung slightly, but the energy in the restaurant had already changed irreversibly. The air, previously heavy with the toxicity of ideological judgment and the sour smell of spilled soda, now seemed rarefied, cleansed by the monumental presence of Sergeant Major Thomas Miller. He remained there, a statue of bronze and flesh, with his gloved hand resting protectively on little Millie's shoulder. The girl, who minutes before was a pariah, cowering and humiliated, now stood tall, lifted by the gravitational force of that man's honor. The KFC manager, a middle-aged man with a face glistening with nervous sweat and a crooked tie, finally found the courage, or the fear of repercussions, to step out from behind the counter. He looked at the filth on the floor, at the customers now murmuring in disapproval of his employees' behavior, and then at the veteran. The shame was visible in his stooped posture. "Sir," the manager began, voice trembling, rubbing his hands together in a gesture of subservience, I have no words. Brenda's behavior was unacceptable, absolutely against our corporate policies. I am so sorry. We will take disciplinary measures immediately. She will be let go." Sergeant Miller turned his head slowly. His look held no hate, only a deep and weary disappointment. "Disciplinary measures," Miller repeated, testing the weight of the words. "Son, you let an employee turn your establishment into a political tribunal. You watched while a child was assaulted and humiliated for wearing the colors of the country that allows you to own this business. Your corporate policy should be basic human decency. Her firing is the minimum. The problem is the culture that allowed her to feel comfortable doing that." The manager swallowed hard, nodding frantically. "You're right, sir. Please, let me offer. Lunch is on us. Whatever you want. For the girl, too. Let me try to fix this." Miller looked at the fallen tray, at the chickens scattered like rubble from a battle. He then looked at Millie. "Do you want to eat here, child?" he asked softly. Millie looked at the manager, then at the spot where she had been attacked. She shook her head. The hunger had passed, replaced by a need for fresh air. "No, sir," she replied, her voice steady for the first time. Miller turned back to the manager. "I appreciate the offer, but dignity can't be bought with a bucket of chicken, son. We're leaving, but before we do—" The veteran let go of Millie's shoulder and took a step toward the center of the restaurant. He tapped the tip of his cane on the floor. Tuck, commanding the attention of everyone present. The customers who previously filmed or ignored now watched with reverence. The silence was cathedral-like. "I want you all to look at this girl," Miller said, his voice projecting clear and strong. Without needing to shout, he pointed to Millie, standing with her stained flag but her head held high. "Today, you saw what happens when the silence of the good allows the screaming of the wicked. You saw a child attacked, not for doing something wrong, but for loving her homeland. Many of you grabbed your phones. None of you extended a hand." A young man at a nearby table lowered his head, ashamed. A woman wiped away a discreet tear. The message was piercing the armor of modern indifference. "Freedom," the old soldier continued, his eyes glistening with the dampness of memory, "is not guaranteed. It is not an eternal gift. It is a loan. A loan paid with the blood of men like me and my friends who didn't come back. When you allow ideologies of hate, disguised as virtue, to attack our symbols and our children, you are throwing away that payment receipt. You are spitting on the graves of Normandy, of Iwo Jima, of Vietnam, of Afghanistan." He paused, letting the words settle. "Don't be afraid to be patriots. Don't be afraid to stand up for what is right. Fear is the weapon of tyrants. Courage is the weapon of the free. This girl here," he smiled at Millie, "has more courage in her pinky finger than that woman who ran away has in her entire body." A solitary clap started at the back of the room. It was an elderly man, perhaps another veteran, in civilian clothes. Then another, and another. In seconds, the entire restaurant was applauding. It wasn't a party applause, but an applause of redemption, of recognition. People stood up. The reverse cancellation was happening. The silent majority had woken up, inspired by the leadership of a single righteous man. Miller gave a brief nod, accepting the tribute not for himself, but for the cause. He then turned to Millie. "Let's go, soldier. Mission accomplished here." He offered his arm. Millie, feeling like a princess escorted by a king, linked her arm in his. Together, the past and the future, they walked toward the exit. The manager ran ahead to open the door for them, a final gesture of respect and apology. Stepping out of the artificial air conditioning into the late afternoon heat, the world seemed different. The sun was setting, bathing the parking lot in a golden and orange light, typical of those cinematic moments where hope feels palpable. The air smelled of freedom. They walked to a wooden bench nearby, away from the restaurant entrance. Miller sat down slowly, letting out a long sigh, allowing age to finally show its signs now that the battle was over. "Come here," he said, gesturing to Millie. "Let's see that uniform." He examined the MAGA T-shirt and the flag. With the handkerchief he still held, he began to clean the remaining stains with infinite patience. "You know," he said, wiping a red spot from one of the white stripes of the flag, "when I was in Bastogne in the winter of '44, it was so cold the coffee froze in the cup. We were surrounded, no ammo, no food, no hope, but we had one thing, we had this flag. When we saw it waving, even tattered, we knew America was there. We knew home was there." Millie listened intently, her blue eyes fixed on the hero's wrinkled face. "They say it's just a cloth," Miller continued, voice choked. "They say it's a symbol of oppression, but they don't know. They didn't see what I saw. This flag is the cloak that protects the weak. It is the beacon that guides the lost. and today you carried it like a true warrior." He finished cleaning and put the handkerchief away. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into the top pocket of his uniform and pulled out a small metallic object. It was a pin, old and worn by time, shaped like a golden eagle. "I've carried this with me for 80 years, he said, holding the pin in his calloused palm. "My mother gave it to me before I shipped out to Europe. She said it would bring me courage. Well, I don't need it anymore. My war is over, but yours is just beginning." He carefully pinned the brooch to the collar of Millie's T-shirt, right above the MAGA letters. "You are the guardian now, Millie," he said, looking deeply into her eyes. "The world will try to knock you down. People like that woman inside will scream, will lie, will try to make you feel shame for who you are and what you believe. But whenever you feel fear, touch this pin and remember, you have the blood of patriots running in your veins. You have the strength of a whole nation behind you. Never, ever bow to tyranny. Promise?" Millie touched the cold metal of the golden eagle. A wave of emotion and responsibility washed over her. She was no longer just a girl who liked a red hat. She had been baptized in the fire of cultural conflict and emerged stronger. "I promise, Sergeant Miller," she said, her voice clear and crystalline, using the title he always used in their shared moments of solemnity. "I will never give up. I will never let them win." The old soldier smiled, a smile that lit up his face and made the medals on his chest shine with the last ray of sun. "Good girl. Now, how about that burger? I know an old diner near here. The owner is a retired Marine. Over there, they know how to treat a lady and how to make real French fries. And the best part, they play the national anthem at noon." Millie laughed, a pure, joyful sound that dissipated the last remnants of that afternoon's trauma. "I'd love that." They stood up. The veteran leaned on his cane, and the little MAGA girl adjusted her flag, which now, under the sunset light, seemed to shine with renewed majesty. The soda stains transformed into battle medals. As they walked away, side by side across the parking lot, the image was the perfect definition of American continuity, the heroic past guiding the promising future. From inside the KFC, through the dirty window pane, some faces watched the scene. Perhaps Brenda was there, hidden in the shadows, watching her complete defeat. Because her defeat wasn't just being reprimanded. It was seeing that her attempt to destroy that girl's spirit had the opposite effect. She had created an unbreakable patriot. Justice didn't come through lawsuits or screaming. It came through the restoration of truth. The little MAGA girl had entered that restaurant as an innocent child, but she left it as a symbol of resistance, and as they walked toward Sergeant Miller's old, well-maintained car, the flag on her back waved proudly in the wind, red, white, and blue, announcing to anyone who cared to see that as long as there is bravery in the hearts of the young and wisdom in the souls of the old, America and its values will never perish. And so, under the vast and free sky, they left, victorious, leaving behind the fleeting chaos of the modern world and walking firmly toward the eternity of values that truly matter.